café siempre es peligroso. Hay que tener cuidado con el café.
Sí. Entonces lo van a transmitir, ¿no? Porque...
¿Ya estamos? Buenos días. También a las redes. Esta sesión no cuenta con traducción, así que la vamos a llevar a cabo completa en inglés. Pero si es necesario, podemos luego para las preguntas traducir. Si alguien quiere, vamos a apoyar en eso, por supuesto. So, welcome everybody to this second session of our research seminar with Jens Beckert on imagined futures. This is the second session of 4 we have in total. Yesterday we had a session on the general framework of future studies, of the conceptions of future in modern capitalism, as based on different social theories, basically economic theories. Today we'll have in this second session applications of these topics to the process of climate change. This is related to a book by Jens Beckert that was just recently published, which is called How We Sold Our Future, the failure of the politics of climate change. Well, as you all know, climate change is one of the major challenges of our time. It's not the only one. Sometimes it gets a lot of presence, and there are other severe problems, environmental problems, limitations to our economic and social models as there are ingrained in current institutional structures, in production structures, in consummation structures. But it is a central problem, it is a global problem, and it's a very complex problem. Some people talk about a wicked problem or even a super wicked problem, addressing the difficulty to understand its dimensions, and also the difficulty to act when we are getting more and more specific information, and we are looking at the effects that are accelerating by the day. If you just look at the news in recent days, almost every day there's topics coming up that are showing us how the future is approaching. Consequences that were projected for a longer horizon in 10 and 20 years are appearing right now before our eyes. Last week, there were several reports in the press on the collapse of, or the turbulences in the coffee market. In recent months, the coffee prices have tripled because of extreme weather effects, especially in Arabica markets. So there are strong volatilities. There are, as a high level of uncertainty in coffee markets, which is affecting severely 1 million coffee producers in Mexico in different ways. So these are things that do not allow to wait. And what we are discussing in the area of future studies, what we do in the UNESCO Chair for Future Studies, is trying to get a clearer idea about how the use of the future, of images, of imaginaries, of narratives, of models, and their social and institutional construction and use at different levels, on the individual level, on the organizational level, on a social level, how these images of the future are produced, are diffused, and are used for decisions. And how this process is often strongly biased for different reasons. It's strongly determined by the way the concept of future and this idea about the future enter our decision making on different levels. And there's many ways of getting to a more a deeper level of doing that. This is a topic that's in the agenda. But I think, and that's why for us the contributions by Jens Beckert are so relevant for this understanding, and also for the work that we are developing, that there is a lack of understanding these institutional underpinnings of modern capitalism, and how these processes unfold and limit in a way our capacity to respond, or how these ways of using specific imageries that ignore the problem are allowed to persist or even to grow. Another new thing that came out in the news yesterday is that the US government just decided that the group of scientists that is participating in the IPCC report that is being prepared will be cancelled. The scientific group from the US will not be allowed to participate longer in the process. So this is a way of promoting imageries that try to ignore the problem, like the movie, no? Don't look up, don't look up, don't look at the problems. And we think the contrary is what we have to do. And we have to understand the long-term risks, and we have to understand how we can develop a different approach to using the future and to build capacities at governments, at organizations, but also for our own personal decisions of what we do, what we think, what we buy or not. So without further ado, I'm just briefly, because I also already did a broader introduction yesterday, but maybe not everybody was participating. So Jens Beckert is the director of the Max Planck Institute for the Studies of Societies in Cologne in Germany. he has been a teacher at universities. He has done courses at universities, different parts of the world, Harvard, New School, the Paris universities, among others. He comes from the area of economic sociology, and he's been developing research for many years on these institutional fundaments of modern society, especially in the economy, with applications to different topics like illegal markets, like the role of heritage in wealth distribution and inequality, among many other topics. And so now, in this recent book, he did this connection between the framework of analyzing the future and the way we look at climate change, particularly the difficulties to cope with the consequences of climate change. So we have the presentation by Jens Beckert, and then comments from Raphael and Helen. And afterwards we can get into questions. Welcome, Jens.
Yes, thank you very much, Bruno, for this introduction. I will talk today about this book, which at least in English just came out, How We Sold Our Future: The Failure to Fight Climate Change, which is a book on a very specific question, and this question, I will talk about it in more detail, of course, is simply that I mean, the world, we as the public knows about climate change since many decades, and we know that rising temperatures are in many ways dangerous for our living on this planet. But on the other hand, if one sees what has been done to prevent this or to fight this, then one sees that the measures against it are vastly inadequate. And the simple question which I raise and which I try to answer in this book is, why is it that societies act or react so inadequately to what I believe is in many ways the most important problem that we are facing? Most important, not in the sense that there aren't other problems that are important as well, but most important in the sense that the developments that have the change in natural conditions on this planet is a development which is irreversible. And in this sense, yeah, I'm saying it is the most important problem. And of course, Bruno mentioned this briefly. I talk in this book about climate change, but what we are actually talking about is the whole ecological crisis, which has many more dimensions but climate change. Species diversity as one extremely important one, but also environmental pollution, chemical pollutions, etc., etc. So let me start getting into this, and this is in a way here the starting point. Climate scientists overwhelmingly predict right now that temperatures overall will rise by 2.5 to 3 degrees by the end of the century, given the policies that are in place. And so this is also the starting point for me in this book. we will come to these kinds of temperatures, which have severe consequences in nature. An increase in extreme weather conditions, sea level rise, changes in precipitation patterns. And as Bruno said, these are things that we see already, and you see them here in Mexico. Yeah, and I read a little bit in preparation of this presentation also about Mexico. And of course, there's here also concern with regard to droughts, yeah, and decreasing harvests. There are issues of hurricanes that had devastating consequences. There is temperature rises which have not been seen before here. So there are many issues, yeah, that already can be seen here in the present. And the overall prediction is that that most parts of damages from climate change will actually be seen in the global south. Yeah, so in countries the closer you come to the equator, the greater the damages will be. And now, as a sociologist or as social scientists more generally, we may not be so much concerned with the changes in nature, but what we are concerned about is what these changes mean for our societies, and what consequences they have economically, but also what consequences they have socially. And here, I think it is a safe prediction that in a world in which natural conditions deteriorate, also social conflicts will increase. Yeah, and one can see this, for instance, with migration, which is also a topic, of course, here in this country. But also when you see how societies react to climate events. Yeah, so, for instance, the recent fires in Los Angeles, where local governments, yeah, the same happened in Spain, where local governments were increasingly challenged. Yeah, why are you not doing enough to protect us here? So this is an extremely serious problem, not just from a natural science perspective, but especially from a social science perspective. And the social sciences, although they do much more research now on these topics, but they are latecomers to this debate. For a long time, at least in the core of the field, climate change and environmental problems played only a rather marginal role. So let me say why, what's the background to the problem, and why I do believe that that we will see increasing temperature rise. And this graphic here, or this diagram, shows this in several dimensions. One is, you can see that energy consumption is increasing with economic development. And so this is what you have in dramatic forms in the global north since the 1940s or 1950s. And then in the 1990s, you have again a steeper curve, which has to do with the development of China, mostly. And of course, if you now bring especially India and other South Asian countries into the equation, which have so far, because of high levels of poverty and low economic standards, have been low emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, you can imagine that these emissions on a global level will continue to rise. Now you may say, okay, that's all fine, but we see also an increase of renewable energies, and we can be optimistic that with the rise of renewable energies in years to come, they become more cost efficient, etc., etc. Fossil fuel production will actually go down significantly, and the problem will be resolved. And what speaks against this scenario is that even though renewable energy production is increasing, and the increase is remarkable, at the same time energy consumption in the world is increasing, which has to do with economic development. The world is growing at a pace of roughly 3% economic growth per year. And it has to do also simply with new energy demand that is coming. Yeah? For instance, artificial intelligence right now, the data centers which are built for this are a relevant factor in increasing energy consumption in the world. Another big thing, maybe here also, but it's discussed mostly with regard to South Asia, countries that develop higher wealth levels in hot climates, people start to buy air conditioning units. Yeah? So in South Asia, it is expected that 1 billion additional air conditioning units will be added within the next couple of years, meaning increase energy. So the International Energy Agency is expecting that by the year 2050, where actually the idea of the Paris climate goals is that there would be a net zero situation, there will still be fossil fuels burned in the amount of roughly 80% of what is the current level. So there's only a reduction in the burning of fossil fuels and associated greenhouse gas emissions of about 20 to 25%. If this holds true, then there's nothing that will avoid this temperature to rise in the way that I was postulating it here, and that is consensus among climate researchers. Now I want to make here, especially in this context, a specific caveat here also. And this is, we need to talk, of course, about climate change as a global issue, yeah, because greenhouse gas emissions get distributed globally. But if you look historically and in terms of who is the emitter and who has responsibility on a global level, then, of course, not everybody is equal. And historically, the emission come from the highly industrialized countries in the global north. But now, developing countries in the global south, and especially China, of course, contribute to this as well, increasingly. And I mentioned already the elephant in the room, so to speak, is India, because if India develops the way that they want to develop, and India has high growth rates right now, and that's, of course, totally legitimate, I mean, to get a country out of poverty, but then also there, per capita CO2 emissions will increase. And here you see, and I find this as a descriptive statistics, absolutely impressive. Namely, you can see energy consumption is 100% correlated with economic growth. If you don't have energy in a country, you are poor. And if you have energy, then this is a precondition for becoming wealthier, for economic development. But as long as this energy, and that's the global wealth, the global mix right now, if this is 85% fossil energy, then this will also, all development will lead to increasing energy greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah? And the countries here, these are in a way random countries, but it shows when you have poor countries with low emissions, you have rich countries with high emissions. So this is here where my question comes in. Why are societies seemingly incapable to stop climate change? And I give a very precise answer to this, which I want to spell out in my presentation. But in a way, you have the answer here already in a nutshell. So my answer is, the fight against climate change is failing due to the power and incentive structures of a social order geared towards profit-making, consumption, and unlimited growth, despite our knowledge of the dangers of future climate change. Yeah? So keep this for now, and at the end of the presentation, you will know more about why I am making and how I am making this argument. Now, the book is embedded. It's not a very theoretical book. The book I was presenting yesterday on Imagine Futures is a very theoretical book. Here it is a book which it is also written for a broader public. It is a book that makes only sparse use of social science concepts, but it uses some of them. And one of them is this notion of capitalist modernity. And so the claim here is that since about 500 years, connected with colonialism, we see in the world a change of economic and social structures in a specific way, which includes changes in the economy, but also, and this is important to me, also cultural changes. Yeah? This is not everywhere in the world the same, but it's going in this direction, and of course differentiation is always needed. In terms of the economy, economic structures are organized in capitalist modernity along markets and competition, which brings in the necessity for growth in the economy. That's something I talked about also yesterday. It is organized around private property rights, which is important because communal property rights, which in many parts of the world existed before, are brought into the profit circus or circle, if you want. Yeah? Communal property rights often are in what Marx called simple reproduction. Once you make out of these property rights assets, they come into a logic of profit. And part of this is also the global exploitation of resources. This is nothing new, yeah? And colonialism, of course, is an absolutely crucial part of this. The picture I have here is a plantation in the Caribbean, which was slave work of sugar in a sugar plantation. The sugar produced in the Caribbean was used to feed the workers in England in the cities. Yeah? People who were dispelled from their land. The problem was how to produce calories for the industrial workers, and the Caribbean and the sugar production in the Caribbean was the response to this. Yeah? So this is the global use of resources, just one example. Then, of course, you have development of technology and science. I don't go into this, but you have also very important cultural changes. And one of the important cultural changes in this is the belief in progress. And that, again, goes back also to the book that I was talking yesterday about, namely the different and changing notions of time and temporal orders that we see. So progress has a future orientation. The idea that our world in the years to come, in the future, will be a better one. And that is in many dimensions, but it's also in the economic dimension. But it's not just the economic dimension, also, and here I wrote individual freedom and collective norms. So an understanding that individual rights take precedence over restricting collective norms. And that's important for consumers, and to understand also, I mean, why consumers feel entitled, yeah, to consume, yeah, whatever they can afford and react allergically, yeah, when somebody tells them, yeah, no, for the sake of the environment, consumption must be reduced. Another aspect here is in the cultural dimension that modern societies, much stronger than at least some traditional societies, operate on this duality between humans and natures, and humans and nature. So nature is seen as the other, as the object that can be dominated in cosmologies that are, I mean, connected to the Enlightenment, partly also to Christianity, although that's much more complicated. And that stands in contrast, yeah, to some at least traditional cosmologies that exist. Now, the consequence of this transformation is, on the one hand, that it allowed for this unparalleled wealth development that we have seen over the last 200 years, and what I was also talking about yesterday. But the flip side of this is this incredible use of energy, and with it, and fossil energies, and with it, the destruction of nature. Yeah, so this is the background. Now, explaining how these structures work, I use a very simple model of social differentiation. Yeah? Namely, I look at three social spheres: the economy, state and politics, and population, which is not a very good term, actually. What I mean by this is consumers and voters and citizens. Yeah? And what I'm doing in the book is that I look in different chapters at the economy, at at the state and politicians and consumers and citizens and ask, what are the power structures and incentive structures for the actors in these fields? And do they have an incentive actually to do something about nature or don't they? And this is what I present to you now in the following slides. So the economy, that is relatively straightforward, I think, for everybody. A capitalist economy reacts to price signals. And the energy sector is no exception to this. And the energy sector is one of the most important, I would say next to the finance sector, probably the most important geostrategic sector in a modern economy. Now, in the fossil fuel industry, and Mexico, of course, is part of this, although not a very big player in it anymore, at least, but it is part of it. In the fossil energy sector, over the last 50 years, there was an annual profit produced of roughly $1 billion annually. Yes, $1 trillion. $1 trillion annually. Sorry, that is in German and English. These numbers get different meanings, the words, although they're the same. So do I do this right now? Yeah. 1 trillion.
Same
yeah. Okay, so then I wrote this actually down here, wrong here, or isn't that true? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So, okay, here we have it. 1 trillion. So the whole economy in the world has roughly a value of 110 trillion dollars, just that you see this. In profits, this industry is one of the biggest industries in terms of profits. Yeah. Now, it is very clear that for actors in this industry, just because there is damages to the environment, they will not easily forego these profits. And so the industry, in all countries of the world, are using their structural and instrumental power to keep this well-going business model going. And so they do this, first of all, through structural power. Yeah? And I mean, Mexico is a good example. Yeah, you know this much better than me. I mean, the energy company here, Pemex, yeah, is one of the big players, of course, in this country, contributing about 20% to state revenues, of this in this country. And in other countries, Saudi Arabia, Russia, so the whole economy is even stronger depending on the energy sector. And so they have a structural power, but they also use instrumental power, which is in Europe, but also in North America, a long trajectory of denying the effects of climate change, having a strategy of delaying change, and a strategy of individualizing responsibility for the damages which are caused by energy use. So you may all be aware of these apps that where you can calculate your ecological footprint, your carbon footprint. Yeah, and I don't know whether you also know that this is actually coming out and was popularized by BP, the British Petroleum Company, in an advertising campaign to shift away attention from their responsibility as a company and bring responsible to the individual consumer. So it's us, who are responsible for this, and why don't you do something, about having a lower footprint? That is the idea here. It's a part of public relations. And I want to take, to make understood the logic in which the economic system is operating, I want to take an example from Ecuador, which you may be familiar with, but it was also in Europe, it was also reported widely. In Ecuador, there was last year a referendum where the Ecuadorians were asked whether they would agree to close down an oil field in a natural preserve. And there was a majority saying yes, for the sake of nature and also for the protection of indigenous populations, we agree to do this. And it was a few days before, it was already clear that this referendum would pass. And the rating agency Fitch, that rates sovereign debt, downgraded Ecuador a few days before this referendum, citing increasing country risks, which is in an economic logic totally clear and correct, because if Ecuador has less income from exporting its oil, then of course its financial situation will be less stable. So it is right to decrease the rating and thereby but increase also the costs that Ecuador has for paying its foreign debt. And there you see how, I mean, simply the logic of the system, the incentive structures that the actors have, leads to policies, where, I mean, in this case, I mean, it went through, but where a country is actually discouraged from doing something to protect nature from climate change. But then there is other elements in this as well. And this is that the transformation process that needs to take place is connected to extremely high investment costs. And so simply for these economic reasons, these are, if at all, long-term processes of change. But it's not just the financial dimension. It's also what is in the literature talked about as path dependencies, namely that there exists business models for which you have long-term investments already made. And you would have to write off these investments if you would want to go for a fast transition process. This is why current and new investments into fossil energies are nothing that can be undone very fast. And so investments, when countries now go in increasing investments in these industries, these will be paths that will be determined for many decades to come, because these are long-term investments that are being done here. So let's go to the state and politics. And here you may say, I mean, of course, it's the role of the state and politicians to protect us from these damages. But in reality, the incentive structures for politicians are much more complex in this. And one of this is that, of course, states depend on economic prosperity for tax income and for financing all the things that they want to finance and that citizens also, of course want. So it is very difficult for a state to regulate an industry in a way that reduces actually the profitability, but also it's simply the economic prosperity of this industry. And then on the other hand, but there is of course the obligation of the state to do something for the environment and protect the environment. And all countries, of course, have environmental protection laws and regulate also the fossil fuel industry. But the outcome of this is a compromise. And it's a compromise which leads in most countries to very slow transition processes. And here in Mexico, I mean, there is the question, I mean, what does one do with the income from oil? There are also interests, of course, associated with this, also careers, etc. The question, if one increases renewable energies, will this be run by the state? To what extent does the private sector come in here? These are all contested issues, which then lead to compromises. And the second point here is the short-term orientation of the political system, where it is unpopular for a politician to incur costs which have to be carried currently for benefits that will come only much later. And so in these incentive structures, politicians are not really interested in doing exactly this. So that's a question which we also discussed yesterday already. It's a question of where can actually institutional structures for long-termism come from. But current political structures do not have this. And then again, like from the economic perspective, also from the political perspective, one simply has to look also at the complexity of the transformation process. So, and that's an issue here also in Mexico, but also in Germany, where I come from. With renewable energy, you need a completely different grid, energy grid system. In Germany, the cost estimate for changing and renewing the grid system is $500 billion. And $500 billion is also for a country like Germany a huge sum. It's estimated that this will be financed over the next 25 years with roughly 25 billion every year. But of course, this money needs to be come from somewhere, And so you see, it is in terms of simply the size and complexity of the transformation process, something where one would not expect fast changes. And then the last of these spheres about which I want to talk is the notion of consumption. And here, of course, and I'm aware of this, I talk very much from a perspective of a very wealthy country in the global north, and you have to judge to what extent that applies to a country like Mexico or other countries that are more in the middle range of incomes. So when you look at European and North American history, then you can see that class conflicts, which were at a very high and destructive level in the first part of the 20th century, could finally be pacified in the second part of the 20th century through the incredible levels of growth and wealth development that we had. And so which meant simply that an increasing wealth that was produced in a society could be broadly distributed. And so in Germany also for the first time people had whatever refrigerators, homes with heating, could go on vacation, etc., etc. And that eased up class conflicts. So social integration in these societies was accomplished to a large extent through increasing the possibility of consumption for large parts of the population. So the growth of a big middle class that is happening at this time. And a second point in this, where also consumption plays a structural role in our societies, and that is, I'm very sure, also the case here in Mexico, is that we position ourselves in a social structure by signaling to others what our consumption levels are. So the way we look at each other is, what kind of clothing do you have? Do you have a car? Don't you have a car? Can you go on vacation or not? Where do you go on vacation? Etc., etc. All these are markers in our societies through which we define identities. And so in such a system, there is, so to speak, a competition which is not just taking place as an economic competition, but it's also a social competition which also has this expansive logic to it. It can never be enough. I mean, at the end you find, super rich billionaires that have yachts which are 100 meters long, and have whatever 10,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year. And this is a logic which comes from consumption and is detrimental to the protection of climate. Now, I'm not saying that this cannot change in principle, but what I want to say is it's not just something that has to do with individual attitudes. So in the sense of these carbon calculators, we can simply say, okay, we have now a different lifestyle. No, this is ingrained in the social structures in which we are living. And that makes it so difficult to change, which doesn't mean that it will never change. You have, of course, also in terms of consumption patterns, you have long-term changes, but also these changes are long-term. Lifestyle changes are long-term changes which typically go across over generations. Now, these are these three spheres which I'm talking about, and then I want to say briefly something about the global dimension in this. And partly I have talked about this already. So I don't want to repeat this here. My concern here is, I mean, the normative side, I said, the responsibility for the greenhouse gas emissions that have historically been emitted is largely in the global north. But we can reasonably expect development also in many of the countries from the global south, which means an increase in energy consumption. And if these countries do not go right away into a path which is based on renewable energies, but go on a path that is based on fossil fuels, then we can expect from economic growth further further increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And then a second point, which I haven't mentioned so far, but which is important also, in the global division of labor, countries in the global south have large parts of their wealth from the exploitation of raw materials and resources. And these exploitations of raw materials, resources, mining, etc., often have devastating environmental consequences. And in parts, some of these activities have to do with the energy transition in the global north. Yeah? So electric cars need batteries which are lithium-based. Lithium is mined, large parts of lithium is mined in South America. Yeah, and if you look into the consequences, social and environmental consequences of this mining industry, then you see that in a way, one problem, the problem of climate change, is resolved at the cost of other ecological problems and here, yeah, environmental destruction. So then, of course, you may ask, isn't there a solution with green growth? Yeah, and this is, I think, the dominant answer that is in the world, namely, you decouple economic growth from fossil fuel or from greenhouse gas emissions. And in parts you can see this. Yeah, so if you look at Europe and also North America, you see countries that have economic growth, but at the same time, greenhouse gas emissions are going down. They're still very high, but they are going down. So this is a process that is happening. The question is, does it happen sufficiently and sufficiently fast? Yeah, and climate change and the reaction to climate change has a very short time horizon if we would not want to go into these temperatures that are far beyond the Paris goals. And so my point here is, even if this decoupling is happening, it is not happening fast enough and it's not happening at a level which is sufficient. And then comes an additional argument, yeah, which I also alluded to already, namely, even if we imagine that we come to an energy system which is based on renewable energies, there are these other environmental crises, yeah, where climate scientists talk about planetary boundaries. And where I lack imagination is that in an economy that is globally continuing to grow, and in many ways also it needs to grow given that many people on this planet live in poverty. But if these growth processes take place, that this does not lead to environmental destruction, which, I mean, for instance, has devastating consequences in terms of species diversity and these other dimensions. So what's the result of this? Neither companies, nor state, nor consumers have sufficient incentives to effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This implies that climate change is a crisis of the structure of social organization and not simply an ecological crisis. And that's an important point from a social science perspective. Yeah? It's not, I mean, nature doesn't care, so to speak. Yeah? It's not a crisis of nature in this sense. But it is a question about how can we live on this planet? And that is determined by social organization. And not being able to respond to this crisis is then also a crisis of social organization. So here comes then the question of, okay, so where does this leave us? And of course, I mean, what I'm writing in this book is in many ways pessimistic. I call this myself realistic, not pessimistic, but in the response to the book, yeah. I mean, often, I mean, journalists wrote, oh, it's a very bleak book, it's very pessimistic, etc., and that's also true. The analysis is, yeah, and I mean, one which simply assumes, yeah, that we will get into further climate change. But in the last chapter, I try to write something about what I think, I mean, what does this mean in political terms, so to speak. And I think there's one issue which is very clear, and this is that we will in the future need to focus much more on questions of climate adaptation. Simply, how can we protect vulnerable populations and also our economic resources, agriculture, from the consequences of climate change? Yeah? And so this is the whole aspect of adaptation which will play a larger role. And then the question, but of course, is, I mean, we cannot just let this go, yeah, but we have a normative obligation to somehow think about, as social scientists, how this process of energy transition could somehow be speeded up. And here I make just some very general remarks, but what I would defend in them is the direction. And the general point here is, for me, to say, if one wants to have effective climate policies, one has to think about the incentive structures that exist in these systems that I was talking about. So you will not do economic change or change in companies if you cannot reach for companies alternative business models where they can somehow also make a profit. It will simply not work short of a change of these structures that I was talking about. I mean, yes, if we have a revolution and there's no capitalism anymore, yes. But as long as we talk within the confines of these structures of capitalist modernity, yeah, it won't work otherwise. And the same holds for politics. Yeah? Politicians will be responsive to issues of climate change if they do not have to fear that they get punished for these policies by voters in elections. So a lot has to do with where do voters stand actually on these issues. And that brings us then to the point where the question is, how can attitudes, yeah, and preferences for us, yeah, as consumers, as citizens, change in a way that we demand from politicians more effective policies and from companies as well. And so here my just very general point is, and we can talk about this more in the debate, that I'm a strong believer that such a change and such attitude development takes place, if at all, then bottom up, yeah, from local initiatives, from social movements, from concern, yeah, with local populations, regions, etc. And it does not take place, that's the opposite, from declarations in international climate conferences. I mean, that it is that, I mean, now whatever the climate goal is that or that, this is not what makes a difference. What makes a difference, if there is something that makes a difference, it is coming from the local level, in the sense that the attitudes which are growing there may spread then also in society and reach the larger levels of politics where, of course, regulations need to be done. Yeah? I mean, the problem is, of course, not a problem that can just be resolved on the local level. But we need somehow support for policies on the local level so that the regulations in a larger sphere can at all take place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jens, for this excellent presentation. And I think this is a very important book, because that doesn't, maybe there's many things that we have already known, but that have not been brought together in such a comprehensive way. And that allows to get to deeper understanding and a connection with agendas for social scientists and also for these future topics. And in the book, this pessimistic attitude, I think you called it realist pessimism, if I'm correct.
No, considered realism.
Considered realism.
Yes.
So these attitudes, I think, like, it's not just the rational expectations about the future, but it's also very important what are the attitudes, no, that we are developing towards the future. So there are lots of discussion points, but before we open for questions and the discussion, I would like to ask Raphael to give comments.
Okay.
I think everybody knows Raphael.
Yes. I hope so.
If somebody does not know, he is the head of the Department for Social Sciences here at our division, and he is one of the experts that we have here at the university on topics about climate change and also actions.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Yes.
So please.
I wouldn't call myself an expert, but thank you so much for the introduction. Jens, thank you so much for a very provocative, not only presentation, but also the book is really written in this sort of, I wouldn't even call it a pessimistic approach, but in a very, realistic and very open, wide discussion on the different 9 topics that you discussed in the book. Very interesting. I had the challenge of translating half a chapter by half a chapter, because it's I got it in German, and so I had to translate it into English. And I actually had 4 questions that I would like you maybe to react briefly to. But the first one I had to kind of I already crossed it, because my first question was whether you consider yourself a pessimistic or not, given the type of book that you wrote. You're now declaring yourself a realist in this way, and I think it's a very safe position, even in epistemological terms, because in a way they are realists. The real world is happening right there. We scientists have all the data available, and it's really difficult to understand why people are doing what they're doing. So in a way, I understand your standing point on writing the book about that. And so I would like to focus on the 3 comments that I had. The first one comes to the fact that by the 4th of January this year, the top 10% of the population, the richest top 10% of the population in the world, already depleted their carbon footprint. And so when you read the book, and when you read the title of the book, is kind of spreading the responsibility of climate change to the whole world's population, which is not realistic at all, right? So when we consider that the top of this rich pyramid of population is actually harming more the planet than the 98% of the world, then we have to consider solutions based or tackling those specific sections of the population that is actually harming more and that is actually hampering the well-intended climate change policies that have been designed and implemented. So maybe the first question and the first comment I have is related to the structural incompatibility of capitalism with climate change policies. How do we reconcile economic prosperity, but not to the top 1 or 3 or 5 or even 20% of the global population, but rather to the whole world in terms of its ecological sustainability? So that'll be the first one. I don't know if you would like to react to that one, and I have another 2 that we can discuss, or I just shoot out. Okay. Maybe many of our students, and even I told you about this project that I've been co-leading for the last 4 years about transformative change. We got together in this huge plenary sponsored by UN, where all the countries send their representatives, and then we discussed the latest assessment on global transformative change and how society must react to improve itself for facing the threats of climate change. And then the delegation of the US made this very incredible comment. They were really, really hard pushing for removing specific points of the assessment and maybe adding a bit some other ideas. And then by the end of this discussion, they said, well, everything that we've done might not be important at all after 20th of December, when Trump rose to power. So there's this political and corporate resistance to change, and we're actually checking out the rise of these blocs that are really openly trying to impede climate change policies. Germany is a huge case that we're actually discussing this week. It's a big problem for the world and for the efforts that globally have been pushed for climate change. So how do we ensure that scientists or the scientific evidence that we have already can actually be translated into political will rather than being undermined by all of these political and corporate interests? Your book actually has a very nice approach to it, and actually your last slide kind of took a little bit a position about that. But I would really like to know, beyond this proposition of, we sold our future, that already I'm not that keen on the idea of we all sold it equally, based on my first comment. How do we see that we scientists can actually use the available scientific evidence to push for focusing or refocusing the attention from these corporate interests towards a more sustainability-based approach? And the last one, in the context of the future seminars that we have, guided by Bruno, we invited a colleague from the States that was talking about carnivorism and was dealing about these issues of attitudes and preferences in consumption patterns. And she was saying, you know what, meat consumption is based on an attitude. We are all kind of, we can make possible a change in attitudes towards how we feed ourselves, right? And she was making a case on whether I tell you that your hamburger that you just ate is made out of golden retriever meat. And so the idea, or her idea, was really to pose a huge ethical concern on what you're actually putting in your mouth, because, her contention was that attitudes and preferences are really important for determining your consumption patterns. When in reality, when you left aside that 10 or 5% of the global population that has these really pervasive consumption patterns, most of the global population are not forced by the social structure to eat meat. Rather, is a necessity, And that was my contention against her. So my question for you, based on your couple of slides on consumption, is how do we shift societal views and values away from these limitless consumption patterns and more towards a sustainability efficiency? And when I talk about sustainability efficiency, it's not about getting rid of meat at all. It's rather knowing from where is the meat coming from that hamburger, but also the pepper that you're going to add, the tomato that you're going to be putting in your hamburger. I think it's more relevant to think and to ask about that sort of sustainability efficiency rather than the fact that society as a whole has a determined set of values that are forcing us to consume as we do. So in a way, those three questions kind of arose from my reading of the book. And I have to say that by the end, I wasn't left with a feeling of uncertainty or a pessimistic view. I consider myself an optimistic, and I might be an unrealistic optimist, because somehow I hope that society will become something different that will transform our future. If I rely on the data, if I rely on the evidence that we have so far, for sure I'm going to turn into a realist pessimist, just as Bruno said, right? But I don't read your book like that. I was left with a lot of questions, with a lot of very nice ways forward. And I think maybe the most important contribution of the book would be that it is possible to deliver lots of different analytical frameworks that can be really extrapolated to other contexts within the problem of climate change. I'm with you. I think climate change is the largest and most important and most threatening problem that humanity has faced in its geological history. And so there are lots of opening of windows and doors opened by your book. I would like to congratulate you on that. And certainly lots of points that can and will be discussed in the future, for sure. Thank you so much.
Please.
Yeah. Raphael, these were wonderful comments you made. And of course, I mean, I could talk now for a long time, but I want also others to have a possibility that we open the debate, and maybe we can. So, I mean, the first point, yeah, and that came actually up twice, and I find this really interesting. I write this book, of course, from the perspective of somebody who lives in Germany, in a very rich country in the global north. And you read this book, yeah, from the perspective of somebody who has all the experience and life experience in a country that is on a different, I mean, wealth level, yet, and has much more issues with poverty, etc., etc. And that makes a difference. Yeah, I think if I would live in Mexico, I would probably have emphasized these aspects that you are talking about much more than I did, yeah, in the book, and so that is a self-criticism, so to speak. Yeah, that is something where I mean, it's really the perspective that you take for granted, which also goes into the analysis. Yeah, but of course, I mean, there is in the book a little bit on this. Yeah, so, and it's absolutely true and important to see that, and that holds also true within the global north countries. It's not just that everybody has exuberant greenhouse gas emissions. Large parts of the population are, I mean, on levels that are, I mean, higher than what is seen as I mean, necessary. It's very lower standard by the more than 2 tons, but they're at whatever 4 to 5 tons. Yeah. But then you have the rich part of the population, yeah, where you easily have whatever 20 or 20,000 tons, yeah, for the super rich. And I think it's absolutely right what you're saying, that all policies need to take this into account. And of course, you need to address those who matter, so to speak, yeah, and not those who don't contribute to the issue. But here comes the caveat, and this is the people you're talking about are at the same time the most powerful people in the world. Yeah? So this is, I mean, how do you want to tell Jeff Bezos to sink his super yacht? Yeah, and it's not just, I mean, Jeff Bezos, but that goes, of course, all the way, yeah, into the upper middle classes, yeah, which have lifestyles, which are, including me, which are, I mean, strictly speaking, that they are unsustainable. Yeah. So how do you manage this as a political problem? Yeah, and here, and this goes, I mean, to your second point, and I want to talk actually only very briefly about this, because that is, of course, I mean, that is, you see, that goes to the very end now of what you were saying. The book is, I mean, realistic, and you may also call it pessimistic. It's not plea for resignation, not at all. Yeah, it is the attempt, the normative attempt standing behind it is, no, I want us to act on this problem. Yeah, but I also believe that there somehow is not the one solution. Yeah, and I mean, many of these books on climate change that are published right now, they work in the sense of, they say, okay, that's a huge problem, and here's the solution. And I simply don't believe that there is a simple solution. So it's a very careful attempt to somehow get closer to something, yeah, that may work. Yeah, and so in this sense, I mean, the notion of big problems was brought up. Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, these are problems that don't have this clear solution, and it needs much more of also a collective thought process to make progress in this. And all I can bring in is, I mean, where my thinking brings me with regard to this. And then let me say something about these consumption issues, and which of course brought you back also to the issue that, I mean, that's an issue for wealthy countries and wealthy much more than for large other parts of the world. And two short comments. First of all, I share what I understood also in your comment, this skepticism with regard to the possibility of changing things with regard to climate based on attitude changes. This will simply not work. And we know this. I mean, for instance, the market for ethical garments, yeah, clothing, which is, I mean, advertised a lot. That's 0.4% of the global garment market. Yeah, and also people who are saying, I mean, do something here. They, you know, have lifestyles on the other end where they then contradict themselves. Yeah, again. So that's not the point. Yeah, this will not work. But I think you see where this is a global issue and not an issue where somehow the global north and the global south stand on two different sides, is on the issue of growth. And I think all societies, yeah, be they poor or be they rich, come together in the attempt to grow further. And if they grow, also the countries that have low CO2 emissions right now will increase their emissions. So to say, but there are countries that have very low, or pockets of the population that have very low emissions, that's true, but it is because they are poor, and there is no normative justification for keeping people in poverty. But that means that in the future, yeah, there will be also in this for countries that have low emissions, if they develop, and they should develop, there will be these higher emissions. Yeah, and that is part of a global system where Mexico is also part. And even you see, I mean, the cars that are produced here are sold in the United States. Yeah, and so it's all part of a global system which is anchored in this notion of growth, and which has many benefits, yeah, but which destroys the nature at the same time.
Just super fast, just to thank you. A couple of things. To thank you because of your humility on saying, you know what, you should read, even for the second or maybe the 20th edition of the book. I foresee that's going to be the success of the book. Just to add it, read it with your glasses from the geographical context that is fantastic. And the second one is that certainly there are not totalitarian solutions to climate change. And that is another way that we could use to read this book with no pessimistic approach. So that will really teach you some stuff that you don't know, and that you can actually use it for better understanding other contexts. Thank you so much.
Before we continue, just let me throw in a quick comment on this discussion about the different responsibilities. I think we need to build inclusive future narratives to address these things for different groups. As long as we give the responsibilities to others that apparently are on a higher or smaller level of with a smaller or higher footprint, we are losing because we are individually isolating, and we are not addressing the problem of social change that is behind it. I don't expect an answer now, but maybe we can get back to that. Then we're opening the floor. I would like to ask Helen for comments, and then we open to the floor. Could you please?
You have to use this.
You have to use it. Helen Lugo is a colleague from Natural Sciences Department.
Division. Yeah, from the Department of Processes and Technology.
Processes and Technology.
Well, I have some specific questions. As you mentioned in your lecture, I really think that one of the major causes of the climate change is the use of the excessive use of resources to produce goods and service for us, no? The resources, I mean energy, water, raw materials, come from our planet. Once we use them, well, these resources are also finite. You mentioned the planet boundary, no? And once we use them, we leave waste to the planet. We dispose the waste to the planet. And here in Mexico, our industrial policy is following nearshoring. Non-nearshoring means that the countries move their factories in order to solve their products from a closer space. Our country, I mean Mexico, is encouraging nearshoring to attract foreign companies, and our president says that it's also to look for economic prosperity. What do you think? Do you think it's exaggerated to think that this industrial policy is a modern form of colonialism? This is one question. Another one is about circular economy. You mentioned that we have a challenge to reconcile, to balance the economic prosperity and stopping global warming. Do you think circular economy, is one of the paths that we can follow to achieve or to mitigate climate change? And finally, could you please to give us, to give our students some advices on how can they help to mitigate climate change, and some suggestions from simple everyday actions, and how can they go through their education and future careers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Helen. These are huge questions, and let me. So economic prosperity and form of colonialism. I mean, I do strictly believe that I mean, patterns of global exploitation or center periphery differences play in today's world still a huge role, and also in the energy transition play a huge role. I mean, what I mentioned, that raw materials for the energy transition in the north, lithium is just one example. Cobalt, for instance, is another one, which comes largely from Congo. This is all built upon exploitative structures, which does not mean that a country like Chile wouldn't also benefit, of course, from I mean, having the economic activities that are involved, that come from raw material extraction. But yes, I think we need to. I mean, we need to talk when we talk about the global economy. We have to understand this global economy in terms of power and unequally distributed power. So very clear about this. With regard to the circular economy, I must say, I mean, I'm not talking much about this in the book. I mention it in the book, And there might be people here who have better knowledge and come to a different assessment of this. But the knowledge I have on this tells me that this is mostly like a niche product, where, I mean, maybe in the future something relevant is happening there. I would say most of what I see there is in small pockets. It's experimental. It's at the beginning. And yes, I mean, normatively, that would be the path to go, I mean, because as you say, if resources are endless, obviously, I mean, it cannot go on forever. So the resources that we use need to be recycled and reused, and come into some kind of circular system. I just do not see that this is happening. And just let me give you one example. For instance, lithium, of course, you could recycle lithium from batteries once they are used and cannot, I mean, need to be taken out of I mean, cannot be used anymore. But economically, it's simply not profitable to recycle them. It's much cheaper to just continue extracting the resources, and thereby and an economic system that is built upon profit incentives, How do you want to regulate this? That indeed, I mean, the recycling, just in this case here, would indeed take place. So again, I mean, normatively, I would think, yes, we should try to see how we could get further with this, and we should get better at it. But I don't really see that this is more than a niche where also, in a way, like baseless hope is produced. And yes, the last question: how to, I mean, tell the students how to mitigate climate change. I mean, that comes again. You see, this is this big question. And in what you see, I mean, you are interested in this. That's the start already. And I see this. I mean, the PhD students we get to our institute, so many of them are interested in issues of climate change now. And I think yes, that's the start exactly. But I mean. Man, that is your generation. That will live through this more than me at least. And it's a collective project. And also in encounters like this here, to think about these issues. And it's less so that I don't think that somebody has an answer here. It's more a collective thought process, and I mean process of deliberation, but also a process of action. I mean, yesterday we heard about this project you are doing, in this agricultural community, and I think exactly these things are so important. Where I mean people who are affected by this but know very little about it in abstract terms, come together with academics. On the other hand, academics learn from these agricultural. From these farmers, and you see, I mean, these experiences are carried in networks also. I mean, you bring this experience, and talk about it in this university, and you see, these are the processes. Man, that's where I talk about bottom up. Where one can have maybe some hope of change. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. So now we are ready to take questions from the floor. Maybe we take three together. Monica? Are there more questions? No? Okay. Prof, please.
Hola, hello everyone, and thank you again for the second day of sharing your work with us. Well, I have a question, comment that goes like this. I need that we need to stop calling the companies just companies, no? We need more ethnography of the elites. We need to know the actual names of these people, what are thinking about the world, what are the things that they are desiring, how is the conception of time, I mean, how do they spend free time, no? And on the other side, I think that we need the part B of your book, the other side of the coin, no? Because there are so many movements all around the world that are now doing things. And we need to start researching them, studying them in a serious way. I mean, the same questions. What are they imagining? How are they constructing time? And all those questions. So that's my intervention. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Recently, I wrote with a colleague a book that is relatively similar to yours, but from a different perspective that you should know very well, because it is the title of the book is going to tell you what we are doing. It is the Adventures of Overproduction, Functional Differentiation, Autopoiesis, and the Biophysical Limits of Capital. Yeah. So we are mixing systems theory with Marxism, and well, we are kind of fighting with everybody, against everybody, because what we are discussing is that all these ideas of green capitalism, circular economy, and even the growth are not going to work, and we are saying that to do this, because we were told that we were very pessimistic as well, and everybody, the people who evaluated the book, wanted us to give us a solution. So it is like, well, I mean, it is not our work to give the society as a whole a solution, because, as you were saying, there is no one solution, but two, because we need to know more about what is going on, and because we are, as social scientists, we are losing the narrative, because everybody's thinking that technology is going to save us, and technology is not going to save us. So we need to first state things as they are, as brutal as they are, as terrible as they are, and then we need to start talking and demanding and mobilizing and doing other stuff. So to me, I would say that we don't have to be like, I'd rather be more like Adorno and Horkheimer with the dialectic der Aufklärung, pessimistic but brutal, than Habermas with the idea of communicatives Handeln, communicative action, you know? Because when you get too optimistic, people just relax. And I just, it is not a question, but it is this idea that I think we have to share as social scientists, that our sciences are kind of sad sciences. It's not a fröhliche Wissenschaft, it is a sad science. No? And, but that it is very necessary, and that we need to start like fighting against the people that are expecting us to give us these solutions, because it is not our work. Politicians are doing terrible things, and they expect us to do their job for them. I mean, it is obviously, as a citizen, I'm going to participate and do things, but as a scientist, I don't have to invent a solution that is not going to work, because and in this point I get a little bit Habermasian. I mean, because we need to communicate now. So I just wanted to. I was able to read a little bit of your book. I found it very interesting, and I really enjoy this pessimistic approach in a certain way, realistic approach. But realism is pessimist nowadays. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, and I think that. As social scientists, as sociologists and other social sciences, we need to stop with this idea that we are like doing this sort of technology. Sometimes we can do it, but that technology works at a certain level, at a certain scale. But we are talking about global things, and obviously you can see things changing here. But we are talking about systems, we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about other things. And I think that to remain in a very honest way, we have to be pessimistic. And just to close this idea, because otherwise you see what for example, Kohei Saito does. I mean, now if we read the real Marx, then the good Marx, we are going to do this, and we have to do, how does he call it? Decrescentist communism, but without violence, without anything. Just if you have your lettuces there in your backyard, I mean, that is just plain. I mean, I'm sorry, but kind of stupid. Or people thinking, oh, look, Greta Thunberg is doing things. I mean, that is just living in a world of illusion and not facing the problems the way they are. And that's why I like your book very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, these were two very interesting, thought-provoking questions. Monica, I mean, there's when I mean the point you raised is I mean an ethnography of companies or of CEOs, an ethnography of social movements. With regard to the first, I'm somehow more skeptical. Yeah, in the following sense that, you see, my concern when it comes to, let's say, the CEO of a big oil company is not that this person is an immoral person. Yeah, I mean, we don't know who these people are personally, but I mean, they have children, they are probably concerned about the world in many ways. I don't know, simply. But my point is that their behavior is structurally determined. And there is, of course, some leeway people have, or even in powerful position actors have, but in principle, it is the structures, and we have to look at these structures. With regard to civil society actors, I have a little bit a different perspective, and that actually has a Habermasian background. Yeah, I mean, in Habermas, I don't want to get into a Habermas debate here, but I mean, he distinguishes between the systems, economy and politics, and then the life world. And the life world is where communicative action takes place, yeah, and which is but important in Habermas, yeah. And this is exactly, I mean, the social movements, yeah, that would be exactly the dimension of the life world. And here I think the question of how a society shapes the political and deliberates in the political and becomes active, yeah, as political beings, yeah, maybe also in the sense of Hannah Arendt, yeah. This I think is indeed very important and should be researched, but also researched with the intention of seeing how one can facilitate maybe processes there. And now to you, and of course this is super sympathetic what you're saying, yeah, here. I'm fully with you, and I mean, I was thinking actually to write this book without the last chapter, yeah. And then the publisher didn't want this at all. Yeah, they said nobody's going to buy this book, yeah, because yeah, I mean, people want to have solutions. That's true culturally also. Yeah, we are always we want to have this solution. But in terms of substance, I'm very much with you that I think a big part of the role of the social sciences in this situation is simply to show the mechanisms of what is happening and what is going, and that this is indeed a contribution, yeah, and an important contribution because it helps to clarify thinking, yeah. So But then, me personally as an author, yeah, so what I want to say, it was not just the publishing company that I wrote this last chapter, but it was also me as an author. Because I was sitting there and I was thinking, okay, now I have all this capacity of being able to analyze this. Isn't there also a moral obligation to somehow, I mean, tell the readers what I'm thinking, what could possibly be done without, you see, I mean, that's what I said also before. I mean, I really have, I mean, no respect for these books, yeah, and this Japanese author is one of them, yeah, but there are others also, Jason Hickel, for instance, yeah, who say the problem is big and then there is this easy solution. Yeah, so when it comes to solution, I think a responsibility would be to just already tell how difficult it is, if at all. But I felt, when writing this book, an obligation to the audience to also say whatever I can contribute to this, to also articulate it and make it available in a public discourse. And I'm not saying that this is the final solution, that this is, yeah, and it might even be the wrong direction. I can easily be convinced that other paths would be better. But I think we need to have a conversation about it, and I think we as social scientists should be part of this conversation. Yeah.
One second, yes. I mean, I really appreciate that the answer thing or the comment. Thank you very much. But what I think is that obviously we don't want to be pessimistic. We don't want to be pessimistic, but not fatalist,
yeah,
you know, or cynical.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the. But at the same time, we don't want to say that we have the answer. No, we say, for example, we say that maybe the way out is not going to be fantastic. I mean, because everybody speaks about, okay, the future is going to look much better if we do this and that. I mean, for example, maybe we need a more authoritarian state to do certain things, to force us to do things that we are not going to do free-willing, like what happened during the pandemics. And obviously it's not something that I would like to happen, but we cannot say that the solutions are going to be just like things that are going to be completely of our, that are going to please us in every possible aspect. Or, for example, this idea of another concept that comes from German-speaking countries, like Gesellschaft der Externalisierung, or this society of externalizing, or this idea of the imperial way of life. I mean, obviously, here in Mexico we have our problems, but in Germany, I mean, when we go there, we see, okay, you have all this weight to separate restmüll,
different types of garbage,
different kinds of garbage, and everything looks fantastic. But we learned then that green way of life causes problems elsewhere,
Sure.
And obviously this is a thing that is going to change the way you live and the way we live here, and the solutions are not going to leave us the way we are. And obviously this is a big problem. I saw one of your interviews with the Sternstunde der Philosophie, and one person said that in order to live better, we need to go back to the standard of life of 1978. And you said that is politically not possible. And I know, but at the same time well, maybe if that is the solution, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have to cope with the fact that we are not going to live to this standard, because we cannot have both. We cannot have planet and wealth the same way. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the time.
There was a question here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Leticia Muñoz Langarica. My English pronunciation is very bad. because I want to make two questions. Can I make it in Spanish, please? Okay, thank you. Esta conferencia nos causa, bueno, gracias por esto, gracias por esta conferencia, por esta visión que tenemos o que nos han compartido sobre el futuro, sobre nuestros futuros posibles y nuestras reflexiones que debemos hacer. Creo que hay dos elementos importantes que se nos ponen como una interpelación a nuestro propio trabajo como ambientalistas en el mundo. Creo que formamos, estudiamos y trabajamos muy pocas personas en pro de todas estas cuestiones de las que se han hablado, la economía circular, el saber ambiental, parece que estamos metidos de una manera sistémica en el proceso capitalista a ultranza, ¿no? Y que casi es imposible salir, por eso pues esta visión casi pesimista de nuestro futuro. Y entonces, ¿cómo hacer? Nosotros vamos más lento que la ciencia y la tecnología que nos está rebasando y que casi nos obliga a meternos de manera irreversible en el proceso capitalista. Y que nos cuesta mucho trabajo ir en contra, ¿no? El trabajo ambientalista casi siempre es ir en contra. Entonces, los gobiernos no crean las políticas públicas adecuadas, es muy lento el proceso que tenemos como formadores y como trabajadores en este sentido, y pues creo que sí debemos ir generando este optimismo hacia el futuro y la confianza en nuestro propio trabajo, el compromiso en nuestro propio trabajo y fomentar eso con nuestros estudiantes. Estos ejemplos que se pusieron, como por ejemplo la producción del café, la producción del azúcar, que generan mucha explotación no solamente hacia las personas, sino también hacia el medio ambiente y las consecuencias, la deforestación, etcétera, también tendrían que ampliarse, es decir, que se note, que nosotros podamos trabajar con la visión de cuáles son las consecuencias que están detrás de todo consumo, ¿no? Este consumo del que se habla es muy grave, ¿no? La manera en la que estamos sobre de eso, ¿no? Metidos con toda nuestra mente en pensar que el progreso y que el futuro es justamente tener, sin fijarnos en toda la generación de pues contaminación, ¿no? En general, esta polución que nos perjudica y que queda invisibilizada ante la mejor idea de progreso y de desarrollo, tanto de las comunidades como de manera individual, y este individualismo que se ha generalizado en nuestras mentes. Y creo que esas son cosas que están como en una tablilla para que la podamos hacer y buscar las mejores formas de trabajar en nuestro alrededor con las personas que tenemos cercanas, principalmente los que nos dedicamos a la docencia, con nuestros estudiantes y nuestros círculos familiares cercanos. Entonces, ¿qué visión hay de ello? ¿Cómo podríamos avanzar de una manera más acelerada en ese sentido? ¿Cómo podríamos generar conciencia más rápidamente en ello? Y pues agradezco además las respuestas. Y in English is okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I understand like 2/3 of the Spanish, yeah, but the last third is missing. But I hope I got now with the translation enough from. In a way, what you are asking is of course the question of the whole book, yeah, and the point at the end of the book in the last chapter is exactly, what pathways are there to close the gap or to come closer to a closing of the gap between what we know that needs to happen and what is actually happening. And so, I repeat in a way what I said before. I believe that, that the grassroots level or the bottom-up level, the initiatives that form among people in local communities, and also, of course, in context with political bodies, yeah, this is where I would put. The hope I have, I would put on this, that somehow, networks are building of larger communities of people who have a consciousness and idea of not just of the importance of the problem, but also knowing that indeed much more needs to be done, and that this what needs to be done involves also profound changes in the way we are living. And probably the best way to learn about this is from the initiatives that exist. Yeah, so we could have a seminar here, which I would love to attend, where like we had the beginning of this yesterday, where groups are reporting on what they observe, yeah, and what works, and where whatever grievances and disappointments are. And so, to somehow encourage such a collective learning process, which brings people together, yeah, that would be, the path that where I would be. You see, this is all. You won't hear me saying this is the path we need to go, yeah, and it's easy to go, and if we would only do that, yeah, it's really a very cautious, yeah, and search, yeah, for a path that might bring us a little further, yeah, and it means a little further means, you see, in climate change, it would be a success if the temperature doesn't rise by 3%, but whatever, only by 2.5%, yeah, already, so this would be a success, and also, what would be a success would be if societies would get better prepared to what is ahead. Yeah, I think, at least, maybe I talk here from a German background, but I think our societies are utterly non-prepared. Look at what happened in Valencia, in Spain in the fall, what happened in Los Angeles, yeah, these fires. And imagine this to happen more often in the future, yeah, and having a higher financial toll, where buildings cannot be insured anymore, where the money is not there to repair. How do we protect our societies from the consequences of climate change? That is for me, yeah, a very important question, and maybe a question also to which people are more willing to listen, yeah, because it is really something that hits home, yeah, very, very much. Yeah. Sorry for not. You see, I'm not the person who tells you these are the 3 things. If you do them, you will be a happy person. Yeah, that's. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry.
I don't know if there are other questions here. There's a couple of questions in the YouTube account. The first one, well, they're both from Paulina Chavez. Thank you for that. You mentioned that the actions to fight climate change need to start bottom up. Has Germany followed this course of action? If so, how did they do it? And the second one is related in a way. Do you have any suggestions for less developed countries like Mexico on how these changes can be done? Well, very important. Taking into in consideration, as you mentioned, industrialization and all the issues that come with it.
And well, maybe just to finish up my takeaway, my main takeaway from the last chapter is that an actual solution, and maybe it's very, very close to what Paulina is mentioning in YouTube. Maybe a solution, or at least the solution I read from your last chapter, is systemic change. So we need to change the whole system to do that. And that brought me back to that discussion that Johan Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Center, now somewhere else, is saying, you know, there are two solutions, two technical solutions to climate change. If we stop using tomorrow tractors for producing agriculture, we reduce the photosynthetic pressure of the planet, and then we solve climate change. And the other one is producing food with the largest source of nitrogen in the world, which is our own feces, human feces, right? And so it involves technical problems that are beyond the structural organizations and political will. So what do we need to put in place those technical solutions? Certainly systemic change. And that actually applies to Germany, Mexico, and everywhere else.
I don't know if there's, we could take one more question, one last question. I don't know if there's anybody. Yeah. Could you please approach one of the microphones?
Yeah, thank you. My question is kind of the same like the Miss. You were talking that capitalism is like one of the biggest problems right now because of its consuming system. And the Mr. Sorry, I forgot your name. Was talking that another big problem is that most of the things we look for is that science solves this climate change problem. So I was wondering if there's something like social responsible capitalism, since the social problems cannot be like completely solved by science, like he was saying a moment ago, because, well, science is not going to like give us like the perfect solution for everything we have. And if that's the case, so is there any way like education could help in social problems, not only like going and saying, yeah, this country is kind of poor or something, we have to start giving it some kind of economical resources or something, but we must help people with education. That's basically the question. If there's some kind of education method or something to help not only trusting in science, of course it's important, but it's like, I don't know, making innovations, it always carries some environment problems, like you were saying with the lithium. So how can we not only depend in science, and if education makes a big difference, and how can we do it? You were talking about Germany, and I don't know if there's some education program or something that could be like an example for us here in Mexico to take.
Okay, thanks for the question. I would like to start with Paulina, but I would like not to talk about Mexico, because I think that Raphael would be much better the person to talk about it, but I can talk a little bit about Germany. And of course, Germany has in parts bottom-up initiatives also in Germany. I mean, the environmental movement is a very strong one, started many decades ago, and also Fridays for Future, for instance, was a very strong social movement in Germany. But what Germany also did, and I don't know to what extent this was reported here in the press, but they also started a top-down process, in changing heating systems, where a law was passed which forced people, in the next couple of years, to install heat pumps instead of gas or oil furnaces. And to cut this long story short, there was a huge opposition against this immediately. It was exploited also by social media to use this to weaponize this basically against the party of the Greens. And I think this is an example from which you can see where top-down approaches, as lucrative they may appear from a side of politicians, how they can backfire and ultimately didn't serve the goal at all. And then maybe one last remark on science that seems to me important. So I think there are two issues here. One is I'm a strong believer in science, not only with regard to understanding climate change and what can be the causal chains and also what are the technologies through which we could produce energy without these environmental damages. So I think that is hugely important to support science in this. It's a very different statement if you are saying, I think science will solve the problem. And I'm against this statement. And this is a form also, and you hear this again and again, climate change is not really a problem. There will be scientific innovations in the future which will, bring easy solutions to the problem, so we can just continue our ways of life and burning of fossil fuels. We don't actually have to worry. There, science is used as like a magical deus ex machina, and I think that is extremely problematic. And also problematic politically because it distracts from what actually needs to be done. Now, a last remark on education. Yes, I think that education is very important. There are also educational programs in Germany. I cannot talk about this now here in detail. What I often observe, however, with regard to educational programs in schools is that they very much individualize the problem. So they tell the students, be careful about Germany, how you separate your garbage, and whatever. The issue is, do you go on vacation, do you have an airplane, or not? Things. These individual strategies. And I think it would be much more, or it would be at least also important for students on all levels, in a way to read my book. In the sense. Or an easier version of the book, in the sense that I think it is important also in educational programs that students understand the structural background, the mechanisms that are standing behind this, and understand that it's not just an individual issue, but that it is a social and structural issue. I think this is an important message to make also to younger. To students also in high school, for instance.
I'm afraid we have to close down. I think, there are so many lessons, so many reflections that we can take with us from these sessions, and it's also very much connected to what I think we have to continue to do and to do better as a research community, which is to take seriously our individual and collective responsibilities as scientists and to build better discussion contexts, more related, more integrated. I think we do not have too many opportunities where we exchange ideas on these topics. We are also part of this process of individualization in a way where everybody's looking for his things. And what we want to do with the agenda of the future chair is just this. It's not to propose how the future has to be, but it's about to discuss about how we think about the future and how we can find diverse, multi-epistemic, transdisciplinary, and open ways to discuss these processes. And we have to make sure, and that I'm really happy, glad that we had a big group of students here, also make sure that this is does not stay so much just in the research circle, but that we have a continuous and strong communication and bring these topics through two classes and to these open formats of discussion. So in that sense, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Jens. This was a great presentation and session, and it's a really important contribution for us. Thank you. And well, thank you also for participation online. And I would just like to remind you that we will continue. We have a session tomorrow in the afternoon at the Museo San Carlos, and the historical center that is part of an exhibition called Poetics of the Future that is now on in the Metropolitan Gallery. And at the sessions at the museum, we will discuss different topics also related to imaginaries of the future in cultural and artistic contexts. And we will have a fourth session on Thursday at UNAM at 12 o'clock at the Faculty of Economic Sciences, the Aula Magna Jesus Silva Herzog, which will be on durable wealth, which is another research topic Jens has been working now. Thank you very much. Oh, we have another present.